where they strung up a man, whom they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I get a lot of requests for shows. I do my best to say who brought up the subject I'm talking about. I forget who asked about the Honey Island swamp monster. I think it was Tusk 1157, or maybe it was Ryan from Australia. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Bill. I think it was Tusk 1157. If not, let me know. I'll make amends next week. Hot water by itself tastes nasty. Only by mixing it with coffee do you come up with the best thing on earth. Coffee is fruit. So, drinking this black gold, you're imbibing fruit. Organic Man Coffee Trike has the best coffee and fruit on the planet. Julio roasts the beans, and the coffee is always fresh. 4501 McPherson for those of you in Laredo, or organicmancoffeetrike.shop for those of you that it's too far to drive. Be sure to check out Trailer Trash Terrors. Nothing new for the last few weeks, but there's lots of archived shows that you can go back and listen to. That's what I'm currently doing, working my way backwards through them. I wonder if Paranormal Sideshow will ever come back. John and Stacy keep saying they're going to do another show, and well, so far it's been like 2 in the last year, so I don't know what's going on there. Josh Turner is still hanging in there despite a lot of flack from those people. Indians all over the Americas have told stories about creatures living in the woods or the swamps around them. The Choctaw and the Huma told about the Letiche, a being that lived in the deepest parts of the wetlands. The Abenakis and the Penobscot communities of the Wabanaka Confederacy lived up in the northeastern United States, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia area. They have the legend of a swamp woman called Muskagwadamos or Pesquadamos. The swamp woman is also known as the weeping woman, kind of like La Llorona. Her cries lure men into the swamp. There are versions of the story where the Mukaguasdemos is a childless female spirit who's looking for someone to take the place of either the children she doesn't have or a mate who might give her some. Tribesmen out hunting alone will hear the sounds of crying. If they go to investigate, they're never seen again. Instead of enticing children, try that again. Instead of enticing men, sometimes the crying is there to entice children, trying to get them to follow the sound into the swamp. There are other versions where she is more like the witch from the Grimm's brothers' story of Hansel and Gretel. She lures children into the swamp where she takes them to her home for dinner, only they're on the menu, instead of taking them home to replace the children she doesn't have. Some Penobscot legends say any man who hears her wails, but is lucky enough to not get lost looking for her, is destined to never be happy with a human woman for the remainder of his life. The cries are like hypnotic, and they put some kind of strange thoughts into his head where he's never satisfied with another human. Near the south end of Ware County, where Georgia and Florida meet, sits the Okefenokee Swamp, home of Pogo and Albert. For those of you who are a bit younger than me, or who aren't into comics, Chuck Jones wrote about Pogo Possum, who lived in the swamp along with Albert the alligator, Miss Mamselle Hepzibah the skunk, and Sher- Churchy LaFemme. Churchy LaFemme was a turtle. His name came from the French term chercher la femme, men's attempt to pursue romantic liaisons with women. In English, it translates to look for the woman. This is one of the few French terms I know. That and parlez-vous Frenchy. Because of Pogo comic strips, that's why I know the few French terms that I do know. The Indians living in the area talked about a huge hair covered tribe of beings that lived in the Okefenokee, which actually means swamp. Calling it the Okefenokee Swamp is a bit redundant. The swamp, that's what it means. This must have come about from the Department of Redundancy and Repetition Department. The Indians said as long as you stayed out of the wetlands, these creatures wouldn't bother you. In the 1800s, the first settlers were planting farms around the edges of the swamp, and the Indians told them they should not go beyond the dry land. Is it any wonder that people do things that they shouldn't? A tribal hunting party got lost in the unfamiliar terrain one year. They found themselves in the dark interior, not sure how to get back out. They made camp to wait for the sun to come up, which would show through the trees and point them back home. A group of what is described as being the most beautiful women they had ever seen came to their camp. These women had food and water, along with a warning. They told the hunters that they must leave immediately. The swamp was not a safe place to be. Their husbands, that was not the actual word they used, it just doesn't translate. Their husbands, as they called them, were huge, hairy giants that would not look kindly on any intruders. The Indians, the hunting Indians, took the food, they packed up their few belongings, and they left, walking in the direction that the women pointed. In 1828, it was an extremely dry year in the area. The swamp receded into its interior. Farmers began pushing farther into what was now a dry swamp. Hunters began venturing farther and farther into the heart of the Okefenokee. Two men, accompanied by one of their sons, went exploring into the swamp. They took plenty of provisions and they planned on being gone for about 2 weeks. Deep in the swamp, these men found footprints. Each one was about 18 inches long and 9 wide. The distance between each footprint was about 6 feet. That would be the stride. They remembered hearing the stories about these giant creatures living in the swamp that would look on them as being a quick and easy meal. It was time to leave. Once the three were back home, they told others about seeing the prints and how they felt lucky to still be alive. Word spread. Other hunters began looking to find who or what had made these prints, and maybe make a few bucks showing off their kill. Anything bizarre that could be drug into town was a guaranteed source of income for many years to come. 9 men came to the Okefenokee to hunt down and capture or kill one of these giants. One of the original hunting party was hired to guide them to where the footprints had been found. The party of 10 walked into the mostly dry swamp until they found their tracks. The hunters set up their camp nearby and began scouring the trees for giants. Instead of the hunters finding the giants, one of the giants found the hunters. It did not sneak up on them. It charged forward, taking down small trees as it came. The hunters began shooting as the giant got close enough to begin mopping up the floor of the woods, with some of the unlucky hunters. 5 of the hunting party were killed before the bullets could take down this creature. The men gathered around to gaze in wonder at this thing that had they had wanted to find originally, until they did. It was huge. It stood 13 feet tall. Every inch was covered in dark brown hair. As they stood around trying to figure out should they carry the dead hunters out of the swamp and then return for the giant, or bury their fellow hunters and just take the beast with them, the idea that this monster might have relatives came over them. The stories of a tribe of monsters got the hunters to run for the edge of the swamp. They figured the dead could take care of themselves. No one else wanted to go see if this story was true or not. If it was just a tall tale, it was far safer to say so from the security of the town. And if it was true, nobody wanted to meet the same end as those unlucky hunters. Some Indian legends told of a young child who was abandoned by his family. It lived in the swamp. Growing up amongst the animals, he became more animal than man. Anyone encountering this beast said they were lucky to survive. The Caddo Indians lived in the Louisiana area. They also told of huge hair-covered men that lived in the swamps. As the Frenchmen, driven out of Canada, began settling in the U.S., some wound up in the wetlands of Louisiana. The name Cajun comes from the rural pronunciation of Arcadian. The Indians told them about what might be found in the swamps. The Indians talked about the Letiche. The French told of the Rougarou, or the Wolfman. They also passed on the phrase bête noire, a person or thing that one particularly detested or wanted to avoid. Being French, when they found an island in the swamp covered with honeybees, they named it Maurice des Îles de Miel, the swamp island of honey, or the honey island swamp. Nope, I still don't speak French. Je ne parle pas français. I hope I said that right. Probably not. I don't know how many listeners I have in France, but I hope I didn't drive any of them away. Oh, that's just some stories told to keep kids from wandering into the swamp. Time passes and legends become myths. Myths become tall tales, and people stop believing them. People would still talk about some unbelievable creatures living in parts of the swamp that few folks ever visited. They knew someone who had a cousin that one time saw something big and scary. People became too smart to believe in monsters. The sophisticated people living in town, who never ventured into the swamp, knew for a fact all those Cajuns were lying or seeing things. This didn't stop people from seeing things, it just got them to stop talking about it. Harland Ford was a retired air traffic controller. He had taken up nature photography as a hobby. In 1970, while out in the swamp near the island, he caught an image of a weird looking creature in amongst the trees. After looking at the image for some time, Ford came to the conclusion that this must be the swamp monster that folks had been talking about. From then on, it became the Honey Island swamp monster. During a hunting trip, Ford and Bill Mills walked through the trees en route to their camp. They had their hands full of supplies so that the rifles were slung over their shoulders. As they worked their way along the island, they saw some kind of an animal down on the ground, moving as if it were tearing up something and eating it. The two men stopped walking, and Ford said, "What the heck is that?" The sound of his voice reached the animal, and it stood up. The thing was about 7 feet tall, and it looked to weigh about 400 to 500 pounds. It looked kind of like an ape, only it was standing on two legs. The men caught a whiff of something rotten coming from this monster. Thinking this thing just might attack, the two men dropped their supplies and they got their rifles up and ready. Ford looked at the creature that was looking back at him. He said it looked kind of like a huge baboon, only with a man's face. It was covered with gray hair everywhere except for the face. The eyes were amber. He felt it would have been wrong to shoot this thing because it just looked too human. The creature turned and took off, running on 2 feet. Not knowing what this thing might be, but still thinking it needed looking into, they ran after it. Two men chasing a monster through the swamp. The thing was nowhere to be found. They looked all around the trees, and there were footprints in a few places, but they couldn't figure out where the monster had gotten to. Neither man bothered to look up, never thinking that the monster might be able to climb a tree. Over the years, people have come forward with stories of seeing the swamp monster perched in a tree. Maybe Ford and Mills walked right under the thing and didn't know it. Back where they had first seen the thing, they found a huge wild boar that had been killed. Boar are extremely tough creatures. It takes a lot to get the better of them. Even when mortally wounded, they will still attack and try to kill anything within reach. I had a run in with a wild pig one time. It was injured, and I decided to put it out of its misery. I took careful aim and I shot it right between the eyes. The thing attacked me. Fortunately, it was in bad enough shape that it couldn't run very fast, and I stepped to the side as it got close, and I fired a second round, hitting right behind the ear. As the second bullet hit behind the ear, the first one, well, blood squirted out of that hole. Apparently, I had shot it right between the eyes, and all that did was piss it off. That was a tough hog, and that one wasn't that big compared to what these men had found. Anyway, some bigger, badder thing had broken this wild hog's neck. Ford told others about what he'd seen, and like a lot of people, they said he was mistaken or lying. Not to be dissuaded, Ford got a video camera and he began looking for the monster on a lot of occasions. Him and Roger Patterson must have had a lot in common. For years after this encounter, Ford continued searching for the Honey Island swamp monster. He found tracks in the mud made by what he believed must have been the monster. Here, things get a little confusing. I found photographs of Ford with a bunch of plaster cast footprints. The casts have 4 toes. In other images, the casts have 3 toes. A lot of documents say there were 3 toes, while others say there were 4. His granddaughter says the cast had 3 toes. The prints do not look like anything that is known to live in the swamp or out of it. It was a bit like an alligator foot, if their feet were a lot longer and a lot bigger than any alligator out there. Very long toes, which alligators don't have. Though it's a Bigfoot type creature, the footprint casts that have been collected more resemble an alligator than a footprint. They're 15 inches long and about 7 inches wide. The 4 toes are long with claws on the end of each. 1974, Ford and Mills began showing what they had found. They held up casts of the footprints. The story was featured on In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. The naysayers drug out the old circus train crash once more. This giant ape was just a gorilla that had gotten away from the crash and was hanging out in the swamp. Local farmers began to say that this monster had killed some of their livestock. This was written off as being just wild animal attacks. Domestic hogs can weigh over 200 pounds. Something had gotten into the pen, lifted a dead hog out, and walked off without damaging the fence. So whatever had taken this hog had to have been able to step over the fence. The story began to go around that I had just passed on. The circus train crash happened only instead of a gorilla escaping, it was a bunch of chimpanzees. Not having any girl apes around to hang out with, these guys wound up mating with some alligators. Happens all the time. The offspring became huge monsters, half ape, half reptile. Let's not worry about the whole different species and all. A few of the locals told this story, and it kind of stuck with a lot of people. It began being passed from person to person, and every once in a while somebody will bring it up. These Honey Island swamp monsters, half ape, half alligator. In another Cajun story, people say that many years ago, a child got lost in the fog while walking along a bayou. His plaintive cries for his mother were heard by a mother alligator. The cries were so similar to that of her young, instead of making a meal out of him, the alligator put the child on her back and took him home to her lair. She fed and cared for him along with her young. There is supposed to be magic in an alligator's hole, and the child grew a tail to help him swim through the water. His fingers and toes became webbed. When he had learned all that he could from his alligator mother, he moved to the other side of the bayou where the people lived. Stories to scare kids, or could there be just a smidgen of truth in some of this? After Harlan Ford's death, his family began cleaning out his things, what to keep and what to send on down the road. In the back of a closet, they found a shoebox. In it was a Super 8 film roll. This was from back when you had to send the film off to get it developed. The film was stored on a reel. It was turned over to Ford's granddaughter, Donna Hollyfield. She ran the film through a projector. In it, you can see some kind of a creature moving through the trees. Looking at this film and knowing her grandfather had talked about seeing the monster, Donna wondered why he never showed the film to anyone. Hollyfield has also written a book that features Ford's original writings, including a letter he wrote in 1970 about his encounter with the creature. She also has a website which features various pieces of merchandise based around the idea of the Honey Island swamp monster. And she is also working on producing a new version of the original documentary. I was at the Texas Bigfoot Conference in 2019. I spotted a woman who looked exactly like Donna Hollyfield, to a point that I finally had to ask. And she said no, and she was not the granddaughter of Harlan Ford. I brought up an image of Donna on my phone and I held it next to her, and it looked exactly like her. Even people sitting around her said that she looked like the woman, but she said it wasn't her. Was it her? Or just being, she didn't want the notoriety? If that was the case, what was she doing at a Bigfoot conference? Maybe I'm just seeing things. They say as you get older, people start to look like other people. I don't know. It was weird. In 1973, a tour guide was motoring along the bayou in a small boat. His motor got hung up on something under the water. As he lifted the motor to free it, he saw something swimming behind him. It looked like some kind of a huge ape. It pulled itself up onto the bank of the river and walked into the trees, moving on 2 feet. Ted Williams says he had two encounters. The first was when he was walking through the woods. Ahead, he saw a stump sticking up from the ground. As he looked at it, the stump turned out to be a thing that stood up and ran away. As it vanished into the trees, he said he could make out a 7 foot tall creature covered in gray hair, moving on 2 legs. His second sighting was of two creatures. They were swimming across the Pearl River. One looked to be bigger than the other, and it got to the bank first, pulled itself up onto the shore, and then waited for the smaller one to arrive. He said they both looked human, with very broad shoulders, and their arms hung down to their knees. Barry Ford, I don't know if he's related to Harland or not, and his wife didn't see anything, but they're positive that they heard the monster. During a fishing trip in 2002, they heard screaming coming from the trees around them. As the evening turned to night, the sound kept getting closer. They sat up all night, keeping the fire blazing to hopefully keep this thing away. I met Ben Hansen in Edinburgh. I got to talk to him during the breaks, and he's an okay guy. I don't necessarily go along with all of his ideas. Maybe he was just going along with the producers when they said what he did about the Honey Island swamp monster. On Fact or Faked Paranormal Files, the cast recreated Ford's footage using a man in a ghillie suit. They decided that the film was probably just mistaken identity on Ford's part, but they did not rule out the possibility of a creature in the swamp. The problem I had with that show is you can recreate any paranormal video using $1 million budget and all the tricks from Hollywood. The regular folks come out with a video evidence don't have that kind of money or know how. Just because you can recreate something in a film lab doesn't mean that the original video is a hoax, but that's just my opinion. In the early 1970s, the small town of Fouke, Arkansas, and the surrounding area, including Miller County, began telling of a 7 foot tall creature running around the countryside. It moved like a man, it was covered in hair, and it probably weighed about 300 pounds or so. Other reports put the creature at 10 feet tall and weighing 800 pounds. People might have been exaggerating the size, or there could be more than one creature. The reports all said It had bright red eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. The Fouke monster was given its name by the Texarkana Gazette and the Texarkana Daily News journalist Jim Powell, who often reported on the creature between 1971 and 74. Local legend has it that the creature can be traced back to sightings in Jonesville, which gave rise to the name the Jonesville Monster. In the 1800s, several sightings in Jonesville were reported of a large, hairy creature. The Memphis Inquirer ran a few stories in 1851, and the Caddo Gazette had several sightings listed in 1856. 1908, the Fouke resident, Willie Smith, said that his sister saw the creature when she was 10 years old at the south end of Mercer Bayou. 1910, the Daily Arkansas Gazette told of a strange beast that was loose in the area near Spring Lake Park in Texarkana. It was approximately 20 miles north of Fouke. 1916, a family saw a large ape-like creature standing near the woods near Wright Patman Lake, which is about 19 miles west of Fouke. 1941, two brothers were fishing in Boggy Creek when they heard an odd sound. They looked up and saw a large, hairy ape-like creature grab their stringer of fish and walk off with it. A lot of sightings went unreported. Anyone talking about seeing some kind of an ape man or monster would become fodder for the naysayers. 1955, the creature was spotted by a 14-year-old boy who described it as having reddish brown hair. It was standing in the trees, sniffing the air as if trying to locate something by smell. The boy was scared, so he fired his shotgun at it. The bird shot had no effect. The creature simply turned and walked away. The sightings from Jonesville were overrun by the sightings from Fouke. The Fouke monster made headlines in 1971 when it attacked the home of Bobby Ford and his wife Elizabeth May 1st. According to Elizabeth Ford, the creature, which at first she thought was a bear, reached through the screen window while she was sleeping on the couch. Once again, I don't know if all of these Fords are related or not. The movie, There's Something in the Woods, was written, directed, and starred David Ford. He played a part of John Hurtman in the movie. Brian Impey was on the show back in January 14th, 2017. He got to play a minor part in the movie as well. It was shot in Jefferson, Texas, where they hold the Texas Bigfoot Conference each year. This year, there's going to be the Texas UFO Con, August 19th, in Jefferson. I'll be there as long as my truck doesn't break down again. And let's get back to Fouke, Arkansas. The creature was chased away by Elizabeth's husband, Bobby, when he returned from a hunting trip with his brother, Don. Just after midnight, Bobby Ford was standing on his porch when the creature returned. Not seeing it, the creature managed to grab him by the shoulder and throw him to the ground. He managed to crawl free, and he was treated at St. Michael's Hospital in Texarkana for scratches across his back and a mild case of shock. The Fords said during the encounter they fired several shots at the creature, and they believe they hit it. There was no trace of blood ever found. A search of the area revealed several large, three-toed footprints close to the house. There were scratch marks on the porch, and there was some damage to a window and the house's siding. The monster was long gone. During the following months, several people began reporting seeing this creature in and around the area. Mr. and Mrs. Woods and Mrs. Seedgrass reported seeing an ape like creature crossing Highway 71. Three people reported seeing a tall, hairy creature with red eyes. It was squatting on the embankment at the edge of the woods across the street from their home. A young child reported seeing a monster in the woods near his house. A woman saw a 6 foot tall, hairy creature walking through the woods near Willie Smith's soybean field during the late evening hours. A trail of three-toed tracks were discovered in the field the next morning. The tracks were made by a bipedal creature that was walking upright. Several women and children reported seeing an ape-like creature in the area. They had come to the field to look at the tracks in the dirt, and they wound up seeing what had made the tracks instead. Two men from Kansas reported seeing a strange two-legged animal standing on the side of the road. Two local residents witnessed the monster move across a gravel road in front of their car early one morning. Some guy in a white lab coat working at Southern State College said, "Nay, nay, this cannot be a real creature because it only has three toes. So there." Several footprints were discovered during this time. These prints all seemed to indicate that the Fouke monster had only three toes, kind of like the Honey Island swamp monster. A $1,090 bounty on the creature was offered by the Little Rock radio station KAAY. Several attempts were made to track the creature, including using sniffer dogs, hunting dogs. They were unable to locate the creature. The dogs refused to follow the tracks. It was as if they were afraid of the scent, or more than likely what had made it. Now, there's something about Bigfoot and dogs that the two do not get along well. As word spread of this creature, and folks were talking about the Patterson Gimlin film, the idea of a possible Bigfoot just down the road caught on in Texarkana. Charles B. Pierce was born in Hammond, Indiana, June 16, 1938. His family moved to southwestern Arkansas when he was just a month old. Charles became friends with his neighbor, Harry Thompson, who would later become a film director. The two would make home movies pretending to be big time Hollywood producers. They used an an old 8 millimeter camera. In the mid 1960s, Pierce got a job working at KTAL TV in Shreveport, Louisiana. Next, Pierce became the weatherman at the station, and he was also the host of a children's TV show called Mayor Chuckles. I wonder if there's any copies of it out there still. Pierce continued working in production jobs at TV stations in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas until 1969, when he moved to Texarkana. There, he bought a 16 millimeter camera and he started an advertising agency. He took a contract with Ledwell and Sons Enterprises. They made 18-wheeler trailers and farm equipment. Pierce developed commercials for the company that played throughout the Southwest United States. Pierce launched his independent film career in the early 1970s. He was able to convince one of his customers to loan him $100,000 to investigate and film a documentary on the Fouke monster. Pierce traveled to Fouke and began asking around town to get stories. With a limited budget, he got people to play themselves or to stand in for others. Most of the local kids were thrilled to be part of a movie. Needing someone to play the monster, Pierce asked Keith Crabtree. Keith is very tall and wide, and so he didn't need any padding to make him big enough to be the monster. His father was also in the movie, J.E. Smokey Crabtree, who grew up in Fouke, Arkansas. When he turned 18, Crabtree had become a boxer. At 19, he volunteered for the Merchant Marines, and by the age of 25, he was married and the father of 4 children. Smokey worked as a welder on the Alaskan oil pipeline running from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez. Smokey welded the very first joint of the 48-inch pipeline that laid over an 800-mile line. Crabtree was a lifelong hunter, fisherman, and trapper. He had spent weeks, sometimes months, out in the woods around his home in Fouke, as well as the wilds of any states where he was working. He wasn't a believer in any kind of a cryptid until one day his son had an encounter. Smokey said, "My son came home one day saying he saw this big, hairy creature in the woods behind where we lived. I could tell he was dead serious, too, and this bothered me. I had never known my son to lie, but I just couldn't believe there might be something like that out in the woods that I had been hunting and trapping in my whole life. After a while, older members of my family started coming to me saying my son wasn't lying. They had seen such a creature in the area for years past, but they swore to never tell anyone. However, they felt they had to let me know that my son was telling the truth. I started looking back to things that had happened to me out in the woods and in the bottoms in the past and wondered if something strange was really occurring. Smokey looked into the sightings, and soon he had enough information to write a book. It was called Smokey and the Fouke Monster. And then he wrote a second book called The Man Behind the Legend. Unfortunately, Smokey kind of got shafted by Pierce during the filming of the movie. There were no fond memories, shall we say, after the movie came out. Come to think of it, most of the people in town were kind of mad at Pierce, since he made some money off of the film that never found its way into the town. I don't know if Pierce had ever actually promised to share his earnings with the citizens, or they simply assumed that if the movie was a success, they would all get part of the profits. Hey, they did play parts in the film. They told their stories and they allowed the movie to be made in town, and they got zip in return. Was this a bad thing on Pierce's part, or did they just assume that because they were in the movie, they should get rewarded? My wife and I were en route to Floyd, Virginia to visit my nephew and his family. We were going through Texarkana and we took a detour to Fouke. There isn't much between the two towns, trees and grass, a few farms. You cannot miss the Monster Mart. It's on the side of 71, and there's a huge Bigfoot on the roof. And I do mean huge. Just search any search engine for the Fouke, the Monster Mart in Fouke, Arkansas, and you'll see what I mean. Well, we stopped in, we had a look around, and we wound up buying a bunch of souvenirs. As we were checking out, my wife just kind of asked the clerk about who had come up with the idea of putting a monster on the roof. Without so much as a word, the woman walked away and into the back room. She was gone for a few minutes, and we both just kind of thought that she had to go do something important. We stood there and we waited until she got back. She finished ringing up our purchases, and I asked the same question that my wife had asked. She turned and walked away again. We stood there and we waited again. until she came back and finished our sale. I asked her how could we find Boggy Creek so we could get some photographs. She told us to drive south until we saw 134. Take it to the east until we saw the sign for the creek. So we did. We drove for maybe 30 or 40 minutes and we never saw any sign for Boggy Creek. I decided it was just too far to turn around and go back, and so we just kept going east. Later, I asked Brian what he thought was going on, and he said that the folks in Fouke can be a bit non conversational. They must think that everybody is out to screw them over, so they act like they're already that way. Back to the movie. The Legend of Boggy Creek came out as a drive in movie. Drive ins are different from most movies. A lot of kids went to not so much watch the movies as to mess around with their friends. A lot of drive in movies wound up on MST3K. You can't find many drive ins today. They kind of went the way of the roller rink. Charles Pierce did make money on the movie. He went on to produce other such movies as Boggy Creek 2 and The Town That Dreaded Sundown. I've seen them both. Hollywood put out several movies with Boggy Creek in the title so they could cash in on his success. Return to Boggy Creek, which starred Dawn Wells of Gilligan's Island fame. When Pierce produced The Town That Dreaded Sundown, Dawn Wells was in it as well. I think she got killed by the Phantom Killer with a trombone. You got to see the movie to believe it. Some of the things in it. Well, anyway, it was still had to see it, and it's based on a true story. The Phantom Killer was never caught, and they have no idea who he was. The legend of Boggy Creek had some long reaching effects that nobody saw coming. Thousands of people went to see the movie when it was playing at the drive ins, and some even watched it on TV. Correction, some even watched the movie. A lot of people go to drive ins, like I said, they're not there to see the movie, but some did watch it. One of these people was Lyle Blackburn, back when he was a young child. He went in May 28th. He went in. He went to the drive-in with intentions of laying in the back seat of the car, reading comic books, but instead he wound up actually seeing the movie. He grew up to become a world-famous cryptologist. He's written numerous books on the subject, and he sings in a band called Ghoul Town. I like it. You have to kind of get used to some of their movies, some of their music, but I kind of like it. He's been the host on several cryptid TV shows as well, and he was on Strange Things with Chris James back in May of 2018. I saw the movie as well back in 1973 when I was 15. Now, I might not be a world famous cryptid researcher, but I did get more interested in monsters because of the movie. At just about every Bigfoot conference that I've been to, someone will mention seeing that movie as they were growing up, and this got them into looking for cryptids. Charles Pierce has done a lot more for Bigfoot hunting than anybody else that I know of. 1991, the creature was reportedly seen jumping from a bridge. Also 1997 and 98. There have been a combination of about 40 reported sightings of the creature in just the last few years. Some cryptozoologists say that the Fouke monster is not a Bigfoot because its footprints are wrong. Now, Bigfoot has a foot that looks more like a human with some small differences. The Fouke monster, as well as the Honey Island swamp monster, have 3 or 4 toed feet. The theory to explain this is the 3 and 4 toed monsters were isolated from their fellow creatures, and this has led to inbreeding. As children were born to close relatives, their genes got screwed up, and this led to foot deformities. There could be other mutations that resulted from a small population. Until a monster actually comes forward and we can look it over, we may never know. Is the Falk monster a Bigfoot or is it something else? Either this explanation is right or these swamp monsters a different kind of creature that is also big and hairy. Just because a animal, a creature, a human, a thing is tall and covered with hair, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a monster. It's a Bigfoot type monster. The Indian legends all said that these creatures would eat people. A very few Bigfoot stories ever involve consumption. I bought a copy of The Legend of Boggy Creek at one of the conferences that I was at. It's a DVD that was made from a copy of a copy that was probably a copy of several other copies. Lots of copies had been made. Uh, the video isn't that good simply because the footage has been washed out over the years, and the audio was kind of bad as well. As film is run through a projector, it receives a whole lot of hot uh, air because of the light bulb. That doesn't sound very intelligent, but that's how it works. There's a lot of heat involved in showing a movie back when it was filmed, and this caused the film to get damaged. So the more times the film was shown, the more damaged it would become, and there weren't that many copies to begin with. So when they made the DVD, it was a copy of a copy of a copy that wasn't that good. But it was the best thing I could find, and so I bought it. And I watched it a couple of times. Charles Pierce's daughter, Pamela Pierce Barclough, wanted to remaster the movie and bring it back to its original glory. The first thing she had to do was find out who possessed the copyrights to the movie. A copyright is a kind of a weird thing. Depending on the medium, rights sometimes expire and sometimes not. For example, H.G. Wells' books, they're no longer under copyright because they were written so long ago that the copyright has expired. But when it comes to movies, I don't know if they ever expire or not. Pamela did some digging and she found out that L.W. Buzz Redwell, the trucking magnate who had advanced Charles Pierce $100,000 for the film's production, had managed to hang on to the copyrights. She contacted him with her plan and he agreed to sell her the rights. Redwell turned the rights over to Parkalow for $1. That was the easy part. It just involved a piece of paper with signatures on it, one quick trip to a notary, and it was done. The hard part was going to be finding a pristine copy of the original film footage. So many copies made from one original caused scarring on the surface. Running the film over and over had damaged it. Plus, the film was exposed to high heat, like I said, from the projectors. Copies just wouldn't do. There was too much damage. As film companies would come and go, they would be bought up by bigger companies, or their footage would be sold to cover debt. Warehouses full of old films changed hands all across the planet. Some companies didn't even have inventory on what they had on hand. Tracking down one film made nearly 50 years ago was not easy. An original print was obtained from the British film industry in London, and it was enhanced by the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, New York. 4,000 pictures were taken of each frame to get it the proper depth. Pamela wanted the movie to feel like you could reach out and touch someone in it. Restoration of the sound was handled by Audio Mechanics Recording Studio of Burbank, California. Once the film was digitally ready, it was shown in Texarkana 48 years from its first showing, which had also been in Texarkana. The theater was packed. People came from all around to see the movie, even having seen it for the first time 48 years previously. I chose to not go since it's 600 miles from Laredo to Texarkana, and that's a long drive just to see a movie. Sometimes I wish I'd gone, but then I think that's a long drive. Fouke, Arkansas is now a city of about 850 people. It's doubled in size. It has grown a bit in the nearly half century since the legend of Boggy Creek was made. The story still has an impact and an economical life in town. Mayor Terry Purvis saw the movie back when he was 17. He says the movie is still leading to tourists coming to town to see the area and to buy souvenirs. I hope that woman at the Monster Mart is acting better or treating customers better than she did us. Maybe it was just a bad day. I don't know, but that was weird. Unexplained. If you ever find yourself in Texarkana or the surrounding area, take a little drive to Fouke and check it out. South from Fouke, Arkansas, maybe 50 miles, is Sabine County, Texas. There is a creature running around the area known as the Sabine Thing. It looks like a huge ape, covered in gray hair, and it also walks on two legs. Jeff Stewart became interested in cryptid animals after his experience when he was 15. He was on the show 3 times in 2017, and he was going to be on a fourth time, but our scheduling got screwed up, and I was never able to get a hold of him, or he was never available, and eventually I just never got to him again. Maybe someday later. Uh, I've kind of stopped doing interviews, but that's a whole nother story. Jeff said, I had an encounter with something walking on two legs. I know everything that walks these woods, and I found myself face to face with something I could not explain. It was a very traumatic experience for a kid. After that, I saw a couple of black panthers, and everybody said they don't exist. After researching it, science says they don't exist. From there, I developed a thirst for knowledge. In 2018, Les Stroud, the survivor man, contacted Jeff Stewart and wanted to go to East Texas and look for the Sabine thing. To a lot of folks, this sounds just like a Bigfoot, but those that have seen it say that it's something else. The two men, along with the film crew, showed up in Sabine River and they camped out for several weeks. They set out trail cameras and they did the usual Bigfoot hunting things. The footage from the game cameras showed nothing in the thing department. I have expressed my theory to a lot of Bigfoot hunters in the past, and they all give me that same "you're nuts" look. What if this creature, whatever it is, can see infrared or ultraviolet light? If it can, then all those game cameras, which are triggered by infrared beams, well, it's going to see them and avoid stepping in front of them. They say, oh, no, no, it's just a big ape. They're not into the whole woo category that I'm in. In 2000, the residents of Sabine reported seeing this gray ape-like creature in the area's dense forests. A similar beast called the Caddo critter, which could be the same beast, is said to inhabit the bottoms around Caddo Lake. The Sulphur River along the Texarkana border has been the source of similar sightings for decades. Bigfoot research organizations are looking into both the Sabine thing and the Caddo critter. They are not members of the Woo group like me. They believe these creatures are flesh and blood animals and there's nothing paranormal about it. I've been lectured by plenty of Bigfoot experts on how it's wrong for people like me to call Bigfoot paranormal. They're flesh and blood animals, just like bears and mountain lions. That's why we find so many dead Bigfoot bodies all over the. Never mind. People report seeing a Bigfoot type creature, and these groups are ready to listen and write down everything they say. Then the witness says something about how the tracks just stop in the middle of a big field, or there was a bright light in the sky before or after the sighting. Suddenly the phone goes dead and there's never a callback. We don't know what Bigfoot or the swamp monsters are. We can make all kinds of guesses and we can try to investigate. As soon as the evidence turns in a paranormal direction, is not time to go to the local coffee shop and discuss what you know the thing is. Why so many researchers get close-minded when things go in a direction that they don't like? I know Bigfoot hunters who think all UFO and ghost investigators are nuts. I know ghost investigators who say Bigfoot is just mistaken identity and UFOs are only seen by crazy people. I know UFO researchers who think Bigfoot hunters are crazy and ghosts are just people's imagination. If someone has seen or heard something that they cannot explain, why not give them the benefit of the doubt until you know for sure that they are misguided? I listen to folks tell me all manner of bizarre stories. I have no reason to think they're lying or nuts. I also know a few people who are certifiably crazy, as in they need strong medication in order to keep their feet on the ground. They only see things when their medications are out of balance. Sometimes there is a better living through chemical dependency. I'm pretty sure that it was Tusk 1157 who suggested the show tonight. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, spread the word. Tell other people they should be listening in as well. If you didn't enjoy the show, what the heck are you listening to me for in the first place? If you'd like to support the show, you can buy my books. That is the easiest way to get me some money. If you go to Amazon.com and look for any of my books, Chris James, but there's more than one author using my name. So look for the Laredo Paranormal Research Society or Paranormal Laredo, and there should be a link on the page to my other books. If you're in Laredo, you can find my books at the Organic Man Coffee Trike on McPherson. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. And now I can't find the off button. There it is.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.